Hey everyone, and welcome back to Off the Crutch. I'm your host, Travis Davis, and today's episode is very special because it's all about South by Southwest, which was a few weeks ago in Austin, Texas. I spent 3 days connecting with leaders, creators, and changemakers. Even now, I'm still processing what I experienced because it was that good. This was my first time attending South by Southwest, and it didn't disappoint. I found myself drawn to panels on happiness, resilience, and well-being, and I was especially moved by the disability-related talks that centered on inclusion and innovation like AI. It reminded me that we're living in a time where our voices are not only needed, they're starting to be heard. And at the center of all this, the man who's been leading the charge behind the scenes, South by Southwest President Hugh Forrest. From its grassroots beginnings to becoming one of the most influential festivals in the world, Hugh has been instrumental in steering South by Southwest's growth and keeping it relevant in an ever-changing world. In our conversation, Hugh and I talk about the evolution of South by Southwest, how accessibility fits into the future of events like this, and why celebrating diverse voices is more important than ever. So let's jump into it. For those who may be unfamiliar with South by Southwest, how would you describe it to somebody that has never been before?
I would describe South by Southwest, or I describe South by Southwest as a celebration of the power of human creativity in all its many, many different forms. So we started way back in 1987, entirely focused on music, live music, the music scene. In 7 years later, in 1994, we added film and what was then called multimedia, which is essentially technology. And then flash forward 30 years post then, we cover a lot of different verticals, everything from food, fashion, style, sports, health, med tech, design, branding. But the kind of unifying principle of all this stuff, the North Star of everything we do is, again, this notion of the power of human creativity. And I think people have always been excited about the power of human creativity. I also think the power of human creativity is never more important than now as AI takes more functions of our day-to-day life, and trying to understand where AI begins and where humans end, or vice versa, where AI ends and where humans begin. I think that human creativity still has a huge, huge role, but obviously that role is changing in the go forward. I've been at South by Southwest in one form or another since 1989. So I came in on year two. My origin story, and origin stories are generally accurate. There may be a little bit of embellishment, as I got hired at the event because at that time they didn't have a computer and I did. The state of technology for their very small office way back in 1989 was there was a phone line and a fax machine. So I got hired because I had a computer, and I had a printer also, a laser printer also. That was part of the deal. And I certainly, back in 1989, I never thought that the event would grow as much as it's been fortunate enough to grow. B, never thought that it would be something that I worked at for 30 years. But it's been a heck of a ride, and it's been a joy to interact with so many creative people from around the U.S. and around the world.
Is there a particular moment that stands out, or a couple throughout your long tenured journey at South by Southwest?
Um, a lot of different moments in terms of the growth of the event and the evolution of the event. 2007 was a big year. Why 2007? That was the year that Twitter kind of launched at South by Southwest. I say kind of because they'd been out for several months, but they used South by Southwest as kind of their coming out party. While the event was much smaller than what you saw a couple of weeks ago in Austin, it was nonetheless still pretty influential at a small crowd, and they got a huge spike in buzz and usership after being at South by Southwest. And that really fundamentally changed the complexion of the event, where it went from an event that was primarily focused on music with kind of a side part of technology to something that became more and more focused on technology with a cool music festival attached. So after Twitter launched here in 2007, literally every startup in the US, every startup across the world wanted to be at South by Southwest to try to get the same kind of buzz. And every VC wanted to be there to be at the event to discover the next Twitter. It's certainly kind of, weird talking about Twitter in 2025, X, because
Hmm.
of how much Twitter has changed. But I will say that social media has always been a big, big part of the event. Even before Twitter, we had a CEO of a company called Friendster who was a keynote speaker in 2004. And then, that through line to 2025 when we had Jay Graber, the CEO of Blue Sky, was one of our keynote speakers. And Blue Sky very much kind of feels like Twitter felt like in the early days, much more focused on community and finding points of common ground as opposed to emphasizing our differences.
It's really cool to see all the tech companies, and what I noticed right away was just the energy that the South by Southwest brings, and just the people. You just going into these different rooms and seeing people, for example, that I've only watched on television, but then you're feet away and you're learning from them and their experiences, and they're taking questions from the audience. And so I think, yeah, it's really designed to bring people together from everywhere. And because it was my first event and I didn't know what to expect, but I noticed right away there was a lot of accessibility options for people with disabilities, from the shuttle to the booth there, the convention center. And even when I was watching you give the opening remarks, there was a sign language interpreter. I'm assuming that's been something that you've all thought about for quite some time, but man, how do you guys do it so well so people like myself just feels comfortable with navigating this event?
Well, very, very, very much appreciate the nice words there. And I will say that we have made a ton of mistakes
Mhm.
on accessibility side of the fence, but as always, when you make mistakes, hopefully you learn something from them. And I think that we've gotten a lot better with accessibility, with how we serve the disability community. I say that we've gotten a lot better because I think we still have a long way to go. But it's heartening that you noticed our efforts there, and that's important. I mean, despite the national climate, we still very much believe in the importance of DEI at South by Southwest, and
Mhm.
even more so importance of DEI A for accessibility also. And so that hopefully shows up in the support systems we have for the disability community at the event, and in a lot of the or a degree of the session content that focused on accessibility. Again, proud of the efforts we've made there, but very, very cognizant that we still have a long, long way to go.
Mhm. I noticed that there was quite a handful of speakers and presentations around accessibility and AI. Do you think that's going to continue to happen more and more as South by Southwest kind of evolves? How do you see that looking over the next 5 years?
As you say, it will still remain a priority. I think there will be more challenges in creating an event, an experience that is fully accessible to this community simply because, I mean, with a central hub of the convention center, you kind of know all the variables, here's where the elevator is, here's where there's no elevator for X amount of, and with the 2026 event, the convention center goes away. And so will be a little bit more decentralized. The end result being that you have, five, six, seven, eight different hotels, each with their own unique challenges in terms of accessibility. So again, it will be a challenge, but it won't go away. I will also say that a lot of or a lot of the focus that we bring from a content perspective to accessibility is informed by I was on the board for an Austin-based accessibility nonprofit called Nobility. I was on the board for about 5 years there. So I made a lot of contacts in that community. It was cool that we had one of my old board members was a speaker this past year. But, really I personally learned a lot from that experience and made a lot of contacts. And again, I will say that it's something I'm very proud of, and we will proudly continue this focus. We're almost all of us will face some kind of
Mhm.
disability challenge at some point in our lifetimes, right? So this is very important. And unfortunately, a lot of the tech companies haven't been as aggressive in creating systems that are more accessible. And we've seen a lot of improvement on that, but we still need a lot of way to go. And so there's still a lot for us to focus on within our content at South by Southwest.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I share disabilities, the only minority that somebody can be a part of. I just was really appreciative that every session that I went to, the people by the door were asking me questions and making sure that I had all my needs met, and whether it was finding a seat or just seeing if it was possible for me to get into the session. I remember taking pictures with some of the people there that was like, wow, that's just like really cool that there seems to be more of a collaborative sense.
I think
And
that one of the things that we always try to emphasize, or have really tried to emphasize in recent years and will continue to, is just this idea of community, and that we all have something to bring to the table, that connection is extremely important. Face-to-face connection is extremely important, particularly as more of our connections move to virtual platforms. And hopefully, as you say, break down that barrier or encourage the breaking down of that barrier between speakers, quote, experts and audience. And in doing so, create new opportunities. That's certainly another big part of what we do, is hoping that people make connections that lead to new opportunities. That's what you want at any event. And I think that's what you want at South by Southwest, to come away with new opportunities, whether that is a person who can help you, or even just coming away feeling inspired. I mean,
mhm,
inspiration is something that we all need more of,
mhm.
particularly in our current landscape. And it's something that we've really leaned into over the last few years, trying to minimize the people who don't have a positive message at the event, and lean more into emphasize more the people who have a glass half full perspective, can fill us with optimism, with inspiration, with ideas of a better future.
For individuals like myself and other content creators, do you have any advice on what would help make their platform be more authentic and kind of grow? As you said, we are becoming less one-on-one in person and everything is shifting on screens and AI, but do you have any advice on how to stay authentic with your message and your branding for content creators?
With the context, I'm not a content creator, so I'm a little bit out of my depth here. As always, I think it's the more you practice at it, the more you think about it, the more
Mhm.
authentic you can become. And again, that very much applies to this conversation, in the sense that I am so appreciative of your positive words about the how accessible South by Southwest 2025 was. I can tell you that there have been many years where I've been fielding conversations after the event where people were not as impressed with that. And again, you learn, you get better
Mhm.
by just figuring out what your mistakes were, uh,
Sure.
a hard analysis of your mistakes, and going forward. And I would think the same applies for a content creator, and trying to be even more authentic to your brand, is just keep honing away at your craft, keep honing away at your craft. And mistakes are fine, particularly if you learn from them. Mistakes often get you to the place you want to be faster than doing things pretty good, right?
Sure. Yeah. And as somebody with a disability, I face resilience like all the time. And I'm sure that is applicable in business. And so with South by Southwest having to deal with like the COVID um, years and navigating that, and now this upcoming situation with the convention center and having to kind of reimagine what it looks like, what is something that you've taken away or learned from a resilient standpoint of how you've had to navigate it in the past and taking that into the future?
I think in terms of what I've learned, what we've learned from resilience is take a hard look at what your strengths are and
Sure.
what aren't your strengths, and very
Hmm.
much lean into your strengths. An example here is post-pandemic, we were the first year back, we adopted the approach that almost every event did, which was that we're going to do a hybrid event, half of
Mm.
it in person, half of it online, which, would think that that would be twice as hard. It's actually like 100 times as hard to do an online event. But even more than that, beyond we ultimately made the call that, hey, our strength is face to face. And
Mm.
we'd love to do more stuff online, more stuff because we already do some where we live stream keynotes and some of the bigger sessions, but let's really push into our strength, which is face to face in person. And I would say that, and that's similar to leaning into our strength of community. So again, resilience to me means taking a very hard look at what you do well, what you do best,
Hmm.
and trying to maximize that. And the things that you don't do so well, you're either eliminating or saying, hey, we'll come back to this in a couple of years. But right now, let's go with what we do best.
Yeah, I agree. Growing up with cerebral palsy, I've understood where my limitations are because of my disability, but that's also allowed me to develop skills that have come natural to me or things that are now part of my strengths. And so I no longer focus on my weaknesses, but double down on what I'm good at. And I just, yeah, took a lot of great information from the different presenters that I hope to one day maybe speak at or run a business just as great as X person, but their stories of this is how many times I've failed and this is how many times I've had to pivot is so relatable to somebody with a disability because I I fail all the time, and sometimes my disability makes me feel like an imposter in some areas of business, but it's just refreshing to be around so many like-minded people.
Good, good, good. Well, kind of reiterating the theme here, it's what we focus on is humanity, the good in people, that we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us.
Hmm.
Uh, we do this in a city, Austin, Texas, that has always cultivated and celebrated creativity and community. And the fact that it happens in March when spring is springing and
Hmm.
the world, you have this physical manifestation of rebirth also works well. I thought this year was exceptionally powerful in terms of the community that came together and the themes of commonality, and really look forward on doing even more of that in March 2026.
We'll wrap it up with this. Is there anything that you can share that people can look forward to next year at South by Southwest?
Typically, how our kind of process works is that at this time of the year, late March, we're spending roughly a month really pouring through and trying to digest all the feedback.
Hmm.
There'll always be, we almost always find in the feedback, learn of good things that happened that we
Hmm.
didn't have any idea of, and things that weren't so good that we didn't have any idea of. And then using that feedback as kind of the foundation to rebuild the event for I can say confidently in 2026, AI will again be a huge focus because AI is going to be a huge focus in society. I think we'll continue to do a lot more quantum stuff, which we did this year, which was successful, but just a lot of stuff on the power of creativity. I will also say that particularly for your community. I've talked a lot about community over the last few minutes. One of the ways that manifests is that we accept speaking proposals from the community. That process starts in late June and continues through mid-July. So, if someone's out there listening and saying, I really want to lead a panel about how accessibility looks within AI, or I've got this great presentation on how accessibility is changing within the current political landscape. We would love to have that in the interface that we call the panel picker. That again will open in late June, go through mid-July. The URL for that is panelpicker.sxsw.com, panelpicker.sxsw.com. And again, the panel picker is a reflection of how important the community is in all its many aspects to what we do at South by Southwest.
Great. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that link with my audience. And I'm sure there's going to be a handful of people that will take you up on that and submit their applications to speak. So I definitely will be one of them because I want to be more involved at South by Southwest next year. And not just because I came, but because of the generosity of people like yourself and the whole staff. So I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to, if I'm not fully relocated by March of next year, I look forward to seeing you very soon in Austin.
Well, wonderful to talk to you, Travis. Again, I'm excited that you had a positive experience at this year's event, excited to your possible relocation to Austin, and look forward to seeing you again at South by Southwest 2026 next March.
Thank you, Hugh.